So I was talking to a guy the other day and he's about to look for his first investment property and he asked me, Ed, what should I look for? And of course, the goal with this YouTube channel is to help you buy properties that are good investments and go up in value. And the mistake I see property investors and first home buyers make is they pay attention to the wrong things. And I've probably studied more data than almost anyone else in New Zealand about this specific topic. And I've discovered that there are so many things that Kiwis think make a property a better investment, but they actually don't. And so I want to save you money, tell you the things you don't need to spend more money on when you're looking for properties, and ultimately help you make more money when you invest. I'm Ed, an economist at Opes Partners, and this is Property Now. The big issue first-time investors face is that the only time they've ever bought a house, it was for them to live in, or they've only ever looked at properties to rent themselves. Now, when you're in that mindset, looking for a home for yourself to live in, what is the ideal outcome that you want? Well, it's probably to find somewhere that suits your lifestyle, or a house you think you can raise a family in and create a lot of great memories in. Okay, now let's think about when you buy an investment property. What is the ideal outcome you want from that? Well, it's probably to make a lot of money and grow your wealth. That's either through the property going up in value or cash flow from the rent. So if I was to ask you, can we use the same criteria when we're buying a home to live in as we do when we're purchasing an investment property? The obvious answer is no, because these are two different things and we are looking for two very, very different outcomes. And the mistake that investors make is that they start looking at investment properties in home buyer mindset rather than investor mindset. So they're going out there and they're looking for a nice property that they would want to live in rather than looking at it as an investment. And I'll give you a really extreme story to show you how fast some investors go. So just yesterday, we were filming a video and we went to an investment property that I own. And standing there, recording that video, it was the first time I'd ever seen the property. It was the first time I'd ever stood outside it. I actually bought that house without seeing it physically in person. I just looked at pictures and I still to this day have never been inside. Now, I'm not saying that you have to invest this way, but it shows you how far some investors take this when you just look at the property as an asset, as an investment, rather than as a physical building that you would want to live in. And if you like learning about property in this really numbers-focused way, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We release new videos every Monday and Wednesday. And if you do already subscribe, here are some of those things you can ignore. Here are the 5 big things people think will make their property a better investment, but actually don't. And the first one is good school zones. Now, people often say, if I buy a property in a really good school zone, it'll go up in value faster, it'll be a better investment. And that's not necessarily true. When you actually look at the data, for example, the double grammar zone in Auckland, and we compare it to the overall region, what do we see? Well, it's actually pretty close between the double grammar zone and the Auckland region overall. So sometimes properties in the double grammar zone are going up in value a wee bit faster. Other times, properties outside that zone are going up in value a wee bit faster. Now, when you average it out, properties outside the good school zone went up in value faster than properties inside the good school zone. Another big one is the backyard and how much land your property has. Now, we often hear in New Zealand that properties with more land double in value more quickly, and so the more land, the better the investment. And in this column that I recently wrote for One Roof, I showed that that wasn't necessarily true. Properties with more land don't necessarily go up in value faster than properties that are smaller and have less land. So properties with more land don't necessarily get high capital growth. And to be clear, I'm not saying don't buy a property with a whole heap of land, because if you're a first home buyer and that makes you happy, go for it. But what I'm saying is don't think that you have to spend more money to buy a house that has got more land because that's going to make it a better investment. It doesn't. And while we're on it, people often ask about houses versus townhouses. So you might hear people say that houses go up in value faster than townhouses, so houses are a better investment. That is another one that you can largely ignore. So if we look at data from Wellington comparing houses and townhouses, we see the same thing. Sometimes townhouses are going up in value faster, sometimes houses are going up in value faster, but overall it's pretty close. And I don't want you to think, oh Ed, you're so negative, telling me about all of this stuff that doesn't matter. So what I'm trying to say is, when you buy a house, especially if you want to buy something that's a good investment, there are so many different things you could think about. And I'm trying to give you permission to ignore a whole heap of those things so you can just focus on the stuff that really matters, which I'm going to cover a little later on in this video. But first, there are two other things you can largely ignore. And one of those things is how close the property is to shops, especially ones that you like. Of course, if there are lots of bougie shops near your property, that can make the property nicer, but it doesn't necessarily make it a better investment. And it's the same with whether the property has got a big garden, got a big deck, and a really nice set of hedges and trees. Now, I want to be clear. If you buy a property in a good school zone that's a house with lots of land, has a massive deck, and it's close to good shops, that will make your property more valuable. It will make your property more expensive. But expensive is not necessarily a good investment. And I'll give you an example. So the most expensive house that sold last year was this $23.8 million mansion in Remuera in Auckland. And it is arguably the nicest house that came to market last year. And it's got the big garden, it's close to shops, it's got lots of bedrooms, and it's just the most beautiful home almost in New Zealand. But no one is going to argue that this is the best investment. Now, why is that? Because not many people can afford this sort of property. It's a great house, but it's a terrible investment. And the trouble with home buyer mindset is that you're looking for a property that is a nice property, and that's not your goal when you're an investor. Your goal is not to buy a nice property, it's to build wealth, make money, and buy good investment. So save your money, because those factors don't move the needle. Here's what does. The biggest thing I've found that makes a difference is buying in an undervalued area. And I recorded this video a few months ago and showed that if you only bought in undervalued areas, you would have made an extra $1 million or 50% more money compared to just buying the average property. Now, by undervalued, I mean if house prices look a bit cheap in Auckland compared to where we'd expect them to be, whereas a place like Wanganui is currently overvalued. It's a bit expensive compared to where I'd expect Wanganui house prices to be. So watch that video for more, and I'll put the link down in the description. The second thing that makes a difference is buying a property in an area where house prices have gone up in value faster. Now, of course, just because one area has gone up in value really fast over the last 20 years, that doesn't mean it'll keep doing that for the next 20 years. But I always think that if a place like Addington has gone up in value really fast in Christchurch and way faster than some suburbs like Cashmere or Westmoreland, you can then ask yourself, well, what are the factors that made that happen? And do I think it'll happen again and again in the future? And you can get all of this data and any tools I show you today for free on my website, opespartners.co.nz. I'll put all of the links in the description. The next thing that matters is buying the house that your tenant wants to live in and is willing to pay for. Now, remember New Zealand's most expensive house before? One of the reasons this isn't a great investment property is that not many people in Remuera who are renting are looking for mansions with over 6 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms. So you want to find a property that your tenants actually want to live in and are willing to pay for. So if we look at a small town in New Zealand like Hawera, we can understand who the tenants actually are. And what we can see is that they want properties that have 2 or 3 bedrooms, and most tenants only have 1 car. On top of that, we can look at the 2 largest demographics. It's either solo parents or people who are just living on their own. And you can use that data to get into the mindset of your tenants so you can buy the right property that someone actually wants to rent off you. And the last thing to look for is a good yield and cash flow that you can accept. So that's the rental income you get compared to how valuable your property actually is. And a great question that first-time investors always ask is, well, what is a good rental yield? Well, I've just crunched the numbers looking at the yields that investors are actually willing to accept. And to be above average in New Zealand, you need to be getting a gross yield above about 4.2%. But it does change depending on where you are buying. So if you're buying in an area like Southland, you should be looking for a yield above 5.6%. If you're buying in Auckland, to be in the top 25% of investors, you've got to be getting a gross yield above 4.4%. So if you're buying a property and the goal is to make money, you've got two options. One is to think about the size of the backyard, how close it is to shops, and what school zone it's in. And the other is where you're thinking about the yield, whether the property is overvalued or undervalued, and what your tenants want. And if you look at these two lists, which do you think will help you make more money? It's going to be an investor mindset. And the big mistake that especially first-time investors make is they spend too much time on the left-hand side in home buyer mindset and not enough time on the right-hand side in investor mindset. And if you want to learn more, head to our website, opespartners.co.nz. We help regular Kiwis grow their wealth through new build investment properties.